Kyle Klingman with Track Wrestling. We have Bob Bowlsby, commissioner of the Big 12, but more importantly, a fine young lad that attended Waterloo West High School under the legendary Bob Siddens, who coached 11 state championships, one of the all-time great high school wrestling coaches. How are you, Bob?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on, Kyle.
Great to have you on. And I always like to start with Bob Siddens because he passed away just over a year ago. How are you maintaining his legacy, and how do you think about him every day?
Well, I spoke with a group of coaches that Dan Huff lined me up with, and I told them, I think a coach all the time. I go into a big negotiation and I hear his voice saying, "Don't take a back seat to these guys." And he just, I guess, other than my own father, Coach Siddens had more impact on me than anybody in my life, and to have lost my dad and Coach Siddens in a 1-year period was hard. But you have to realize that both of them had good long lives. They made it to 90, and we should all be so lucky. But Bob Siddens was a guy that he changed lives for a lot of his young lads, and our relationship obviously evolved over our lives, but Coach and I stayed close, saw each other frequently, and I really miss him.
Do you remember how he came into your life?
Yeah, he was the iconic figure as the high school wrestling coach, and my dad was a good athlete. He was a 2-time All-State basketball player and a 2-time All-State football player at West High. And when I came home and told him in 7th grade that I thought I was going to be a wrestler, I think he thought I'd lost my mind. And my coach at first was a guy by the name of Don Blue, that was an Army veteran who came back and was a gym teacher at West High. And then ultimately the wrestling coach in the junior high was a guy by the name of Marty Lundvall, who was also on the junior high faculty. And they just both had real significant impacts. And I liked it right away, and showed some signs of having some ability. And Coach Siddens was the guy that was running the big program, the one that the iconic high school wrestling program. And so, the West Cedar Falls meets and the East West meet, those were big sporting events. There were packed houses often. They were highly ranked teams, and he was the guy that was running it. So, and it was at the same time that guys like Dan Gable and Marty Dickey and Chuck and Bob and Ed Heaney and those guys were all going through the West High program. So you had lots of people to admire, that some of whom had come through the West Junior program and some of whom had come through Edison. But Coach Siddens was the guy that was leading the parade and creating lots of champions. And, he inspired many of us to get through junior high and get a chance to wrestle for West High School.
When you look back at it, and of course there's a natural evolution in how you get to that point, but thinking about you being from Waterloo West and then Dan Gable being from Waterloo West, and then you're the athletic director at the University of Iowa, and then he's the head coach at Iowa. When you look back at that, does that ever strike you as just kind of an interesting coincidence that it happened that way?
Yeah, it was Dan's 4 years older than I am, so it was it was always one of those kind of out of body experiences when you'd go up to the high school, or he'd come back from Iowa State and train with the high school guys, and when Coach Siddens would say, go and train with that young lad over there, you'd about soil yourself when you went over to begin rolling around with Dan Gable. But I think as much as anybody, Dan helped me get the athletic director's job at Iowa. I had been the chair of the NCAA wrestling committee for a couple of years while I was at UNI. And Dan and I, of course, had known each other and occasionally trained together. And he was a mentor for my brother John. And so when the Bump Elliott decided he was going to retire, my name came up, and honestly, I never really thought it was a very viable option. You know, you don't move from at that time a 1AA or an FCS school to the Big Ten very often. You have to have the right set of circumstances, and we had some good success at UNI, but I never really thought that it was likely that I would be able to make that leap. But I think my credibility and involvement with the wrestling at the national level, and the fact that Dan Gable was one of the committee members that I worked with, and I think that helped me to bridge the gap with Hayden Fry and Tom Davis and others who would have something to say about it. And you know, that's one of the things I did, is I went down and spent some time with Dan, and spent some time with Coach Davis and Coach Fry, and with Bump Elliott, and said, hey, listen, if you guys you know, are, you don't have to be openly supportive of my candidacy, but if you have problems and are going to be an impediment, I won't pursue this. And they, you know, they didn't necessarily encourage me, but they said no, that wasn't going to be a problem. But I think Dan had great credibility with those iconic coaches, and I think he said to them, this guy can do the job. And so, you know, indeed, West High had something to do with it. Coach Siddens had something to do with it. Coach Gable certainly did. And you know, then for us to, you know, I think he was wrestling coach for 9 years while I was at Iowa, and then he was an assistant AD and helped us in a wide variety of ways until the time I moved to Stanford. So we worked together a lot. Our kids went all through high school, you know, grade school, high school together. And, you know, it's just I knew Mac and Katie Gable, and our families are very close. And so, you know, that it is ironic that we all end up in Iowa City together, but, you know, you can go any place you want to go from Waterloo, Iowa.
Of course, you're the Big 12 commissioner right now, and there's a full slate of Big 12 teams, including Northern Iowa, which is a member now of the Wrestling Big 12 Conference. Of course, everyone has questions about the future of wrestling programs. Old Dominion got dropped, but from your vantage point, do you feel like wrestling is safe right now in the Big 12?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have terrific tradition, even though we only have 4 legacy programs. But you know, ironically, it's the only sport we have where we actually have 12 members. So you know, in that regard, we're kind of a flagship, and it's a, you know, it's a mixed bag. But we didn't really do the affiliate membership for the affiliate for us. We did it for the affiliates, and at the time, UNI was competing in the MAC as their qualifying tournament, and you know, we had Fresno State, who was just getting a program started again after having a really good program for a lot of years. We had programs like Air Force and North Dakota State, and you know, it's kind of a mixed bag. And yet we really have some high quality competitors in the league, and I feel very good about it. I think our league is strong, but one of the reasons why we went with the affiliate membership process is because we felt like some of those programs were probably in jeopardy of being discontinued if they didn't have a viable avenue to qualify for the national championship. It's almost impossible to be an independent in wrestling and have access to the national championship and develop your program and recruit and those kinds of things. So, you know, I think all of those things sort of added up to make it a good decision for the Big 12, but it's also, I think, a good decision for wrestling. And actually, I don't, you know, in the case of Cal Baptist, which is not in our league, but is coached by Lenny Zaleski, who's a Cedar Rapids Prairie guy, of course, and a prominent wrestling name in the state of Iowa. I wish we had a little more ability to take care of them. And, you know, when I think about Fresno State, I don't know why the Pac-12 doesn't take in those guys, and along with Air Force and Utah Valley and some of those guys. I mean, they have a thing called the Mountain Pacific Sports Federation that several of Stanford's sports are in. And you know, I just the Pac-12 championship is on the brink of going away, and yet they aren't adding affiliate members. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So I feel very good about wrestling in the Big 12, and obviously with Iowa State and Oklahoma State and Oklahoma, we have some programs that have very deep traditions, and our wrestler of the year this year was from West Virginia, so they likewise have had a lot of quality competitors through the years. So I feel very good about wrestling in the Big 12. Our tournament draws well. It's the city of Tulsa really. I mean, they give us $100,000 guarantee to bring the tournament there every year, and so they're very committed to it, and so I feel very good about it.
Of course, we're in a situation where we're on lockdown, and there's a lot of questions because John Smith even said we might be in the best times for wrestling, and it seems like there's been a lot of growth. Now that we're on lockdown, how do we grow? How does wrestling grow during this unprecedented time?
Well, you know, I think we really lost an opportunity without having the national championship in Minneapolis. The tournament, even back in the days when I was on the wrestling committee, there's about 8,000 people that go to the tournament wherever it is. You know, mostly former wrestlers and coaches and others that are close to the sport. And then, you know, the local crowd fills in the schools, and the local crowd fill in the rest of the attendance. But we were going to be able to have 46,000 people at the tournament in Minneapolis, and I think that's one of the things that wrestling has done poorly through the years is they haven't brought new people to wrestling. They haven't brought new fans in, and I think there are a number of things that are kind of converging right now that are really good. My dear friend Tim Johnson has done a great job of promoting to his ESPN colleagues the value of the wrestling tournament, and you know, now we're doing all 6 rounds on television, and the coverage has never been better. Organizations like Flow Sports, my older son works for Flow, and you know, they obviously got started in wrestling, and they've done a great job. And so, you know, I think the coverage is better. We have a chance to grow the sport. I really think you know, the old adage that you can always tell a wrestling coach, but you can't tell them very much. And you know, we haven't been very smart about how we grow the sport. Personally, I really believe we need a dual meet tournament that will allow people that identify with the schools more than the individual wrestlers to be fans. I think we would get an entirely different fan group with a high quality dual meet tournament. And I don't mean to replace the individual tournament, because it's my favorite sporting event. It always has been. I think it always will be. I just think it's extraordinary when you're sitting in the stands and you hear the Oklahoma State fans erupt, and you look around and there's nobody from Oklahoma State wrestling. And the fact is, the reason they're cheering is because an Iowa guy is getting beat, or a Oklahoma guy is getting beat. And so it's just one of the great sporting events, but it's sort of in a capsule. It isn't being promoted as widely as it should. And I've said that to the National Wrestling Coaches Association. I've spoken to the organization a couple different times, and change is hard for this group, and yet we need to evolve. And I think one of the things we need to do is to bring more people to the sport as spectators. You know, anytime your spectators are mostly former competitors or former coaches, you're in a very insular environment, and so. You know, I think there's a lot of great things about it. I love the sport, and yet we're our own worst enemy at times. So we need to keep evolving.
Why is that concept so hard for wrestling to grasp, that you have dual meets, they don't count for anything, and then at the end of the year you switch and go to a Big Ten championships or NCAA championships or conference? Why is that so hard for people to grasp that might not be the best concept?
Well, you know wrestlers like I do, and we both love them, but they're one of their best traits is that they're stubborn. and you have something that is so singular in its in the goal that there is for a junior high wrestler or a high school wrestler or an early college wrestler, having an opportunity first to qualify for the NCAA tournament and then to place in the NCAA tournament and then perhaps to win the NCAA tournament. That is today and always has been the holy grail. And I think that's a great thing. We're single-minded about what it is that we want to do. I don't think you diminish the individual tournament one iota by also having a team tournament. I think you just grow the number of people who like and treasure the sport, and so I wouldn't want to do anything that would cause diminishment of the Big Ten or the Big 12 tournaments or the NCAA tournaments. But I think there are things that are additive that could make a big difference.
What can wrestling do during this time that there's shutdowns and just getting back into the swing of things with colleges to not only maintain but to grow and get better?
Well, we've long had challenges with skin infections and those kinds of things, and so disinfecting has become part of the culture of wrestling. How you prepare your mats for practice and how you prepare mats for competition and how you keep saunas clean and those kinds of things. So, in some ways, I think we have a little bit of a head start on the rest of the world, but we're going to have to take it to a whole new level because, it's a little different to try and do social distancing in a wrestling room or in a wrestling competition. You're head to head, jaw to jaw, face to face. And, if one of the competitors is a carrier, pretty good chance you're gonna convey the disease. And so, I worry about the upcoming season with the absence of a vaccine. I think in an athletics environment, we're going to have to do a lot of testing, and it's expensive. And then the other thing is, you mentioned it at the outset. There are institutions that are looking for opportunities to get smaller, to discontinue sports, and wrestling is usually one of those because it doesn't have a well-developed female competitive component to it. There are some women that are involved in the programs, but they don't. The numbers aren't such that it makes a huge difference in the equity components of it. So I think this is a period of real jeopardy because there is going to be tremendous financial stress in the system, and if we're not playing football this fall, there are going to be institutions that have plywood on the windows and that are not going to be able to send their teams on the road. And so this next 60 days is critical for getting back to playing football, and not that it's any more important as a standalone activity than any other sport. There's nobody that works any harder than wrestlers, and so if the labor theory of value has any merit, wrestlers deserve the same considerations for opportunities as football players or anybody else. But the reality is that football makes the cash register ring, media dollars and gate receipts and the like. And so, I think it's not inconceivable that we would get through the fall with a lot of disruptions and therefore disruptions in revenue, and it could have an effect on the scope of wrestling and all other sports as well. And I think when that kind of stress is in the system, one of the places that people look for relief is getting rid of sports, and so that's likely to be men's Olympic sports first, and then to a slower extent women's Olympic sports, and that's not a good trend for wrestling. And as I've told wrestling coaches through the years, you need to make yourself indispensable in your athletics program. And I by the way, I think some of the same jeopardy is in play at the high school level. I think high school wrestling has stayed strong over a long period of time, but there are those places where consideration will be given to sponsoring fewer sports as a result of the financial pressures that are in the system. So I'm certainly not forecasting that, and we'll work hard to avoid it. But the fact is, these are very unusual times. I don't know that I've ever gone through anything that's like it. And I think in a combative sport where you're nose to nose like you are in wrestling, there's also a higher risk of infection. There's a bigger prerogative or a bigger imperative for disinfectant and appropriate mitigation activities. There's a real need for testing, and that's expensive. And so, it's not without its challenges, but we'll come out the back end, and we'll be fine. But I think we're in for, not just wrestling, but sports in general is in for a bumpy ride this next 24 months or so.
With your position, a lot of what you do is predicated on making decisions. What goes into how you make decisions and then execute the decision that you've made at that point?
I try and be a good listener. In the end, I sit at the front of the line, and there are some things that I just have to trust my own instincts over a long period of time. But I have some very veteran people on my staff, and I also have a great group of athletic directors and coaches and chancellors and presidents. So I rely on them. People think commissioners have a lot of authority, and we do have some things about which we have sort of sole responsibility. If we have an officiating circumstance or a disciplinary situation or a disagreement among schools, I end up getting involved in those kinds of things. But more often than not, our rules and policies are made by our ADs and our CEOs, and I'm the guy who has to enforce those things. So I try and shape policy, but I don't have I'm not the benevolent dictator. I'm not in the position to say this is the way it's going to be. I have to be responsive to what happens with our members, and so it's a delicate balance. But one of the things that has been kind of interesting for me in the commissioner's role after 35 years as an AD, I'm now an age contemporary with many of my presidents and chancellors. In fact, I'm older than quite a few of them. The same is true with the athletic directors, and I think they all sort of view me as a mentor as well as their commissioner. And so I frequently get called on things that don't have anything to do with athletics, they just when I take a firm stance on something and really advocate hard for it, our ADs are respectful because they know I've been through it before. And I think likewise our presidents and chancellors are, because they know that I'm trying to take a broad view of it. So, I'm a collaborative decision maker. I want to listen to people, but I also understand that there's going to come a time when I have to take responsibility for what it is, and that there's going to be scrutiny. There are going to be those that like it and those that don't like it. And as I've gotten older, my skin, I guess, has gotten a little thicker, and that's a good thing, because it's whether you're an athletic director on campus or whether you're in a commissioner's position, you're gonna, as long as it's news, weather, and sports at 6 and 10, they're going to talk about something, and they're gonna assess how you've done and what you've done and those kinds of things. So that kind of goes with the territory.
What decision have you made over the course of either being an athletic director or your current position that has received the most scrutiny?
Oh, I don't. I think probably not hiring Bob Stoops when I hired Coach Ferentz. Bob was the heir apparent. He was the defensive coordinator at Florida at the time, and I pledged to Hayden that I would try and interview his guys, which I did. We had 5 candidates, and Terry Allen was one of them. He was at Kansas at the time, and the other 4 were all off the staff, including Coach Stoops. And everybody thought that he was the right guy, and he had an offer from Oklahoma, and I had made a promise to Kirk Ferentz that he would get a chance to interview, and he couldn't do it till Friday. This was on Wednesday, and Oklahoma smartly went to Bob and said, you need to make the decision tomorrow, or we're going to move on to another candidate. And so I got my ass kicked over it, and it was. I guess there's some validation in Coach Ferentz now being the winningest coach in history, and I really I've actually become good friends with Bob Stoops, and when he was we were working together when he was at Oklahoma. So we've laughed about it, but there were some ways he probably could have made it easier on me, and there were some ways I probably could have made it easier on myself. But just in terms of people being outraged, I suppose that was the one that was probably most sticks in my mind. It isn't unusual, though. When I was chair of the basketball committee, we left a couple of teams out and seeded in a way that people were unhappy with. So I had everybody at Utah State was calling me everything but a good Christian, and everybody at Louisville was up in arms because I had cheated the Cardinals. So I had the morning after that selection, I had 1,800 emails, and we ran what we called the George Carlin filter. We filtered for the 7 words you can't say on television, and the number of emails was down to about 350. So you can guess that they were not very courteous emails.
We'll end with this. What wrestling skill did you gain that applies to what you're doing right now?
Oh, I think really just what we talked about, the loneliness of having to make a decision. Every hiring decision I've made, every difficult disciplinary situation that I have had to manage, every time I've had to dismiss an employee or deal with a student athlete that where the decision comes down to me, those are all enormously difficult. And you just you learn rugged individualism on a wrestling mat. You when you walk out there, your coach is in the corner to help you, but there's nobody else to call upon other than yourself. And you go out and get your butt kicked, you still got to get up the next morning and go get a training run in. And so I think you learn perseverance. I think you learn resiliency. I think you learn self-reliance, and those things are all everyday applicable in business or any other walk of life.
I don't know if a lot of people remember this, but when Tom Brands got hired for the current position he has, Gable came on board as an assistant coach. Did you make Gable submit a resume before you hired him for that assistant coaching job?
No, actually, I don't remember Tom or Dan submitting a resume on that, but he's done a great job. I'm very proud of Tom, and Dan's been a great mentor for him. And it's only problem I ever had with Tom was that he and Terry used to occasionally get into fistfights during practice, and it was, they'd spill out into the hall sometimes, and so we kind of had to mitigate their behavior a little bit occasionally. But no, he's a great young guy, and I say young guy in the same way that Bob Siddens says young lads. I still think of him as being 18 and a college kid, but he's now got children graduating from high school, which makes me feel a little old.